My father looked me dead in the eye during the company dinner and said I'd never make it past middle management, that I simply didn't have what it takes to lead. The entire executive table went silent as his boss, the chairman of the board, slowly stood up with a folder in his hands. But what he said next didn't just shock my father, it shattered everything he thought he knew about his own daughter's career. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The email arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, and I almost deleted it thinking it was spam. Executive Leadership Dinner, Whitmore Industries Annual Strategy Meeting with my name, Stella Harris, listed as an invited guest. I stared at my computer screen in my small cubicle at Morrison & Fletcher Consulting, wondering if someone had made a mistake. I'd been working as a senior business analyst for 3 years since graduating from Northwestern. And while I was good at my job, I certainly wasn't executive material. At least that's what my father had told me repeatedly over Sunday dinners at my parents' house in Evanston. My father, Richard Harris, was the vice president of operations at Whitmore Industries, one of the largest manufacturing conglomerates in the Midwest. He'd worked there for 28 years, climbing from floor supervisor to his current position through what he called hard work and knowing your place. He was old school in every sense, believing in hierarchies, chain of command, and the idea that respect was earned through decades of service, not fresh ideas or innovative thinking. The invitation confused me because I'd never done any work for Whitmore Industries. My consulting firm handled mid-sized technology companies, mostly in the software sector. Whitmore dealt in industrial manufacturing, steel components, automotive parts, heavy machinery. It wasn't even remotely close to my area of expertise. I called the number listed at the bottom of the email. Whitmore Industries, Executive Offices. This is Patricia speaking. Hi, Patricia. My name is Stella Harris, and I received an invitation to an executive dinner this Friday, but I think there might be some confusion. I don't actually work for Whitmore. There was a pause, then the sound of typing. Harris. Stella Harris. Yes, you're on the confirmed guest list. The dinner is at the Metropolitan Club, 7 p.m. Business formal attire. Is there anything else I can help you with? I'm sorry, but who exactly invited me? There must be some mistake. The invitation came directly from Chairman Lawrence Pemberton's office. He specifically requested your attendance. Will you be joining us, Ms. Harris? Lawrence Pemberton. I knew that name only because my father mentioned him occasionally, always with a mixture of reverence and intimidation. He was the chairman of the board, the man who'd transformed Whitmore from a regional manufacturer into a national powerhouse over the past 15 years. My father had maybe spoken to him directly 3 times in his entire career. Yes, I heard myself say. I'll be there. I hung up, my mind racing. Why would the chairman of my father's company invite me to an executive dinner? We'd never met. I'd never even been inside a Whitmore facility. That evening, I drove to my parents' house for our weekly dinner. My mother, Susan, was setting the table when I arrived, and my father was in his usual spot in the living room, watching the financial news with a glass of bourbon. Stella. Sweetie, you're early, my mother said. Kissing my cheek? I decided to just ask directly. Dad, do you know anything about an executive dinner at Whitmore this Friday? He looked up from the television, his expression shifting from relaxed to alert. The strategy dinner? That's for senior leadership only. Why? Because I got invited. He actually laughed. Not a polite chuckle, but a full belly laugh that made my mother turn around from the kitchen. You got invited? To the Whitmore executive dinner? Patricia from the executive office confirmed it. She said Chairman Pemberton specifically requested my attendance. The laughter died, replaced by a frown. That doesn't make any sense. You don't work for Whitmore. What would Larry Pemberton want with you? I bristled at his tone, the implicit suggestion that I wasn't important enough to warrant the chairman's attention. I don't know, Dad. That's why I'm asking you. He set down his bourbon glass. Look, Stella, the executive strategy dinner is where real decisions get made. It's for people who've proven themselves over years, decades even. These are serious business leaders discussing million-dollar decisions. Maybe someone made a clerical error. The assistant specifically confirmed my name was requested by Pemberton himself. My father stood up, his jaw tight. This was a look I knew well. The look he got when he felt his authority was being questioned. Then maybe Pemberton wants to discuss something about one of your consulting clients. But don't get any ideas about this being some kind of career opportunity. You're an analyst, Stella. A good one, I'm sure, but you're not executive material. You don't have the experience, the strategic mindset, or frankly, the presence needed to operate at that level. My mother's voice came from the kitchen, tight with tension. Richard, that's enough. I'm being realistic, Susan. Our daughter is 27 years old with 3 years of work experience. The people at this dinner have been leading organizations since before she was born. I don't want her walking in there with false expectations and embarrassing herself. Or me. That last part stung more than I wanted to admit. The concern wasn't really about me. It was about how my presence might reflect on him. I grabbed my purse. I think I'm going to skip dinner tonight. Stella, my mother started. It's fine. Mom, I have work to prepare for anyway. I drove back to my apartment in Lincoln Park, my father's words echoing in my head. Not executive material. It wasn't the first time he'd said something like that. Over the years, there have been countless small comments. Maybe business school isn't for you. Consulting is fine. But it's not real leadership. You're good with details. But you don't see the big picture. I'd always told myself he was just being protective, worried about me setting my expectations too high and getting disappointed. But tonight, the message felt clearer. He didn't believe I had what it took to succeed at the highest levels. The next 3 days passed in a blur. I tried to research what I could about the dinner, about Whitmore's current strategic initiatives, about Lawrence Pemberton himself. Everything I found suggested my father was right. This was a gathering of the most senior leaders in the company, people with decades of experience and proven track records. By Friday evening, as I stood in front of my closet trying to decide what business formal actually meant for a dinner I wasn't supposed to be attending, I'd convinced myself this was all a mistake. Maybe I'd sit through an awkward meal, make polite conversation, and by Monday morning it would all make sense when someone sent an apologetic email about the invitation mix-up. I chose a navy blue suit with a white silk blouse, professional, but not trying too hard. I wore my grandmother's pearl earrings for luck and confidence. As I looked at myself in the mirror, I could hear my father's voice. You're not executive material. Maybe he was right. But I was about to find out. The Metropolitan Club was in the heart of downtown Chicago, one of those old money establishments with marble columns and crystal chandeliers. A valet took my car and a host checked my name against a list before escorting me to a private dining room on the 3rd floor. The doors opened to reveal a scene that made my stomach drop. A long mahogany table was set for 20 people, and at least half the seats were already filled with men and women in expensive suits, holding glasses of wine and speaking in low, confident voices. These were people who belonged here, whose very posture suggested authority and success. And there, near the middle of the table, was my father. His eyes widened when he saw me, genuine surprise crossing his face before settling into something closer to embarrassment. I was actually here. The invitation was real, and now I had to figure out why. A woman in her 50s approached me with a welcoming smile, extending her hand. You must be Stella Harris. I'm Jennifer Caldwell, Chief Financial Officer. We're so glad you could join us. Her warmth caught me off guard. Thank you for having me. Though I have to admit I'm still not entirely sure why I'm here. Jennifer's smile turned knowing. All will become clear soon enough. Come, let me introduce you to some folks. She guided me around the room, and I found myself shaking hands with titles that made my head spin. Chief Operating Officer Marcus Webb, General Counsel Diana Rothschild, Vice President of Strategic Development Paul Chen. Each one greeted me with a curious interest that suggested they knew something I didn't. My father remained at his seat, watching this parade of introductions with an expression I couldn't quite read. Finally, Jennifer led me to the chair directly across from him. "Richard, I believe you two know each other," Jennifer said with a hint of amusement in her voice. "She's my daughter," my father said stiffly. "Yes, we're aware," Jennifer replied. "Quite a coincidence, isn't it?" She moved away before either of us could respond, leaving an awkward silence between us. My father leaned forward slightly. "What exactly did you tell them?" he asked in a low voice. "Tell them? Dad, I didn't tell them anything. I didn't even know I was invited until Tuesday." "This doesn't make sense," he muttered, more to himself than to me. "Larry doesn't do anything without a reason." Before I could ask what he meant, the room's energy shifted. Conversations tapered off and people began moving to their assigned seats. A tall man with silver hair and sharp blue eyes entered through a side door, Lawrence Pemberton. He carried himself with the kind of quiet authority that didn't need announcement. "Good evening, everyone," he said, his voice commanding attention without volume. "Please sit. We have much to discuss tonight." I found my place card. I was seated between Jennifer Caldwell and a younger man whose card read Thomas Morrison, VP of Innovation. My father was directly across the table, 2 seats down from Pemberton himself. As servers began bringing out the first course, Pemberton remained standing. "Before we dive into our meal, I want to acknowledge that we have some new faces at the table tonight. This dinner has traditionally been reserved for Whitmore's senior leadership, but as we enter a critical phase in our company's evolution, I've invited individuals who represent the future we're building toward." His gaze swept the room and landed on me for just a moment, long enough for everyone to notice. "The manufacturing sector is facing unprecedented disruption," Pemberton continued. "Our traditional approaches, while successful for decades, are no longer sufficient. We need fresh perspectives, innovative thinking, and the courage to challenge our own assumptions. That's why some of you may be surprised by the guests at this table." He sat down, and conversations resumed, but now there was an undercurrent of speculation. Who are these new faces? What did Pemberton have planned? Thomas Morrison, the VP of Innovation beside me, leaned over. "First time at one of these? Is it that obvious?" He grinned. "Only because you look like you're trying to solve a puzzle. Trust me, by the end of the night, the pieces will fit together. I'm Thomas, by the way. Everyone calls me Tom, Stella. And I genuinely have no idea why I'm here. Neither did I when I got invited 3 years ago. I was just a product manager at a tech startup Larry had invested in. Now I run our entire innovation division." He took a sip of wine. "Pemberton has an eye for potential. If he invited you, there's a reason." Across the table, my father was engaged in conversation with the man next to him, but I could tell he was listening to every word Tom said. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The first course was served, a beautifully plated salad with microgreens and candied walnuts. As we ate, Marcus Webb, the COO, stood and began presenting on the company's current operational challenges. He spoke about supply chain disruptions, labor shortages, and increased competition from overseas manufacturers who had embraced automation more aggressively. "The reality," Marcus concluded, "is that we're operating on razor-thin margins in several divisions. We need to modernize or risk becoming obsolete." Paul Chen went next, discussing market trends and competitor analysis. Then Diana Rothschild covered recent regulatory changes that would impact the industry. Each presentation was sharp, data-driven, and painted a picture of a company at a crossroads. Throughout dinner, I noticed Jennifer Caldwell occasionally glancing at a folder beside her plate. She caught me looking and smiled, but offered no explanation. As the main course was being cleared, Pemberton stood again. "Thank you all for those comprehensive updates. Now, I'd like to shift our discussion to strategy moving forward. Specifically, I want to talk about leadership." The room went very quiet. "Whitmore Industries has been my life's work," Pemberton said. "When I became chairman 15 years ago, we were a regional player struggling to compete. Today we're a national force. But I'm 72 years old, and it's time to think about succession. Several people shifted in their seats. This was clearly news to most of the room. The board and I have spent the past 18 months conducting a comprehensive search, both internal and external, for the next CEO of Whitmore Industries. We've interviewed dozens of candidates, reviewed countless profiles, and asked ourselves a critical question. What kind of leader does this company need for the next chapter? My father's posture had changed. He was sitting straighter, his expression carefully neutral. I realized with a jolt that he might be hoping this announcement involved him, that decades of service might finally be rewarded with the ultimate promotion. Traditional manufacturing wisdom says you promote from within, Pemberton continued. You take someone who knows the business inside and out, who's earned their stripes on the factory floor and worked their way up. That's the path I took, and it's the path many of you have taken. My father nodded almost imperceptibly. But here's the uncomfortable truth we need to face. That approach is why we're struggling. We keep solving today's problems with yesterday's solutions. We need someone who can see around corners, who understands digital transformation, supply chain innovation, and how to compete in a market where our old advantages no longer matter. Jennifer Caldwell picked up her folder. 6 months ago, Pemberton said, one of our board members attended a consulting conference in San Francisco. She heard a presentation about operational transformation in legacy industries. The speaker was a young analyst from Morrison and Fletcher Consulting who had helped a struggling automotive supplier reinvent their entire business model. The turnaround was remarkable. A company on the brink of bankruptcy became profitable within 18 months. My stomach dropped. I knew what presentation he was talking about. I'd worked on that project with my team, and our director had asked me to present the findings at the conference because I'd led the analysis. That analyst, Pemberton continued, looking directly at me, was Stella Harris. Every head in the room turned toward me. My father's face had gone pale. We've been watching your work very carefully, Ms. Harris, Pemberton said. Not just that. One project, but your entire approach to problem solving. The board has spent months conducting our due diligence, reviewing your case studies, speaking with your clients, understanding your methodology. Jennifer Caldwell stood and walked around the table, placing the folder in front of Pemberton. He opened it but didn't look down. Which brings us to why you're here tonight, he said. And why this dinner is about to become very interesting. My father finally spoke, his voice tight. Larry, with all due respect, Stella is a consultant. She's never run anything. She's never managed a team larger than a few analysts. She doesn't understand manufacturing, doesn't know our culture, and frankly, he stopped himself, but the damage was done. The implication hung in the air. She's not qualified. Pemberton's expression remained neutral. Richard, I appreciate your concern, but I think you're about to be surprised by just how qualified your daughter actually is. Pemberton opened the folder and pulled out a bound document, sliding it across the table to my father. Before you dismiss your daughter's qualifications, Richard, perhaps you should review what she's actually accomplished. My father picked up the document, his face skeptical. As his eyes scanned the first page, his expression began to change. Page 3, Pemberton said calmly. The Hartwell Automotive case study. A 70-year-old parts manufacturer with outdated facilities and bleeding cash. Stella's team didn't just recommend cost-cutting measures, they redesigned their entire supply chain, implemented predictive maintenance systems, and repositioned them in emerging markets. Revenue increased 43% in the first year. Marcus Webb, the COO, leaned forward with interest. I remember reading about Hartwell's turnaround. That was your project? I nodded, finding my voice. I was the lead analyst. We had a team of 5, but I developed the operational framework. Page 7, Pemberton continued, directing his comment to the room now, not just my father. Bergen Industrial Equipment. They were losing contracts to overseas competitors who could produce cheaper goods. Instead of competing on price, Stella's strategy focused on speed and customization. They implemented modular manufacturing techniques and cut delivery times by 60%. Bergen went from laying off workers to hiring. Jennifer Caldwell smiled. We've actually been trying to hire Stella away from Morrison and Fletcher for the past 3 months. She keeps turning us down. This was news to me. You've been trying to hire me? Not for just any position, Jennifer said. We wanted you as Director of Strategic Transformation, a newly created role reporting directly to the executive team. My father's voice cut through the murmurs around the table. A director position is hardly CEO material, Larry. That's still several levels below this table. You're right, Pemberton agreed, which is why we're not offering her a director position. The weight of those words settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Paul Chen set down his wine glass. Diana Rothschild stopped mid-bite. Even Tom Morrison beside me went completely still. What are you saying? My father asked slowly. Pemberton didn't answer directly. Instead, he looked at me. Ms. Harris, I'd like to ask you a question. In your professional opinion, what is Whitmore Industries' biggest vulnerability right now? Every eye turned to me. This felt like a test, not just for my father's benefit, but for everyone at this table. I could play it safe, give a vague answer about market competition or operational efficiency, or I could tell the truth. I chose the truth. Your leadership pipeline is broken, I said. You have incredibly talented people in this room, veterans with decades of institutional knowledge. But you've created a system where the only way to advance is to wait for someone above you to retire or leave. That means your best innovators either stagnate or leave for competitors. You're hemorrhaging talent in the 35 to 45 age bracket while holding on to structures designed for a different era. The silence that followed felt dangerous. I'd just criticized the very system that everyone at this table had succeeded within. Marcus Webb broke the tension with a laugh. She's not wrong. I lost 2 of my best plant managers last quarter to companies offering them VP titles. It's not just the titles, I continued, emboldened. It's the mindset. Manufacturing companies like Whitmore still operate with a hierarchical model from the industrial age. Information flows up, decisions flow down, and innovation happens in isolated silos. Meanwhile, your competitors, especially the ones disrupting the market, operate with flat structures, cross-functional teams, and rapid decision cycles. My father's jaw was clenched. Those tech company models don't work in manufacturing. We deal with physical products, regulatory compliance, union negotiations. You can't just... Dad, I'm not suggesting you operate like a software startup, I interrupted, immediately regretting the sharpness in my tone. But the principles of agility and innovation apply everywhere. Hartwell was a union shop with EPA regulations and legacy equipment. We didn't change what they made. We changed how they thought about making it. Pemberton's expression remained unreadable. Continue. Your second vulnerability is customer intimacy, I said. Whitmore sells to other manufacturers, correct? But when was the last time someone from this table spent a week working alongside your clients, understanding their actual pain points rather than what they report in quarterly reviews? Paul Chen frowned. We have account managers for that. Account managers tell you what clients say? I'm talking about observation, seeing what they struggle with, what inefficiencies they've accepted as normal, what innovations they desperately need but haven't articulated. That's where breakthrough products come from. And your third vulnerability? Pemberton prompted. I hesitated. This one would sting. Succession planning. You're talking about it tonight, which means you're already behind. Most of your executive team is within a decade of retirement. If you don't start developing next-generation leaders now, and I mean really developing them, not just sending them to leadership seminars, you'll face a knowledge exodus that could cripple the company. My father stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This is absurd, Larry. You're letting a 27-year-old consultant who's never worked a day in manufacturing lecture us about running a billion-dollar company? She's not lecturing, Richard, Pemberton said quietly. She's answering my question. And everything she just said is in the consultant's report the board commissioned 6 months ago, a report that cost us $400,000 and arrived at the exact same conclusions. He pulled out another document from his folder and held it up. This is from McAllister Strategic Advisors, one of the most expensive consulting firms in the country. Page 47 identifies a broken leadership pipeline. Page 62 discusses operational agility. Page 79 recommends customer immersion programs. He set it down. Stella just gave us the same analysis in 3 minutes and without charging us a fortune. Jennifer Caldwell nodded. We've been dancing around these issues for years, making incremental changes while pretending we're being bold. Maybe it takes someone outside our bubble to see clearly. My father remained standing, his hands gripping the back of his chair. Even if she's right about the problems, that doesn't mean she's the solution. Diagnosing an illness doesn't make you a surgeon. No, Pemberton agreed. But it's a prerequisite. You can't fix what you can't see. Thomas Morrison spoke up for the first time since the presentations began. I'd like to hear more about Bergen Industrial. You mentioned modular manufacturing. How did you convince a traditional manufacturer to completely overhaul their production process? I welcome the shift to concrete details. We didn't start with the manufacturing floor. We started by mapping every decision point in their process, from order intake to delivery. We found that 60% of their delays came from customer changes after production started. So we redesigned their products with interchangeable components that could be customized at final assembly rather than from the beginning. That requires sophisticated inventory management, Marcus noted. It does. We implemented a just-in-time system with predictive analytics. The software cost less than a single production line, and the ROI hit positive within 8 months. Diana Rothschild, who'd been quiet until now, asked, "What about the workers?" Major process changes usually face resistance, especially from experienced employees. We were involved with them from day one, I said. The best ideas for improving efficiency came from the people actually doing the work. Management had been making decisions in conference rooms based on theoretical workflows. The floor workers knew the real bottlenecks. We just gave them permission to speak up and the authority to test solutions. My father finally sat back down, but his expression remained troubled. You're describing projects with teams of 5 people and budgets of a few million. Whitmore has 15,000 employees and operates across 8 states. The scale is incomparable. You're right, I admitted. It is different, which is why I'm not pretending I could walk in and run Whitmore tomorrow. Pemberton's eyes flickered with something, surprise? Approval? But scale is also an advantage, I continued. Hartwell couldn't afford to fail. One wrong move and they'd go under. Whitmore has the resources to pilot innovations, test methodologies, and scale what works. You can take calculated risks that smaller companies can't. The servers had returned with dessert, but no one was paying attention to the food. The energy in the room had shifted from a formal dinner to something closer to a board meeting, probing, challenging, testing. Pemberton folded his hands on the table. Stella, you said you're not pretending you could run Whitmore tomorrow. What would you need to be ready? My father's head snapped toward Pemberton. Larry, you can't be serious. I'm asking a hypothetical question, Richard. Let me hear her answer. I took a breath, my mind racing. This wasn't hypothetical. Everything happening at this dinner was building toward something, and I was starting to understand what. I'd need mentorship from people who understand manufacturing at a deep level, I said carefully. I'd need time embedded in your operations, not touring facilities, but actually working in them. Understanding your culture, your people, your unwritten rules. And I'd need the latitude to fail in small ways while learning, which means you'd need a transition period where I'm not making final decisions alone. How long? Pemberton asked. 6 months minimum. Maybe a year. He nodded slowly, then looked around the table. That seems reasonable. Any objections? My father's face had gone from pale to flushed. Objections? Larry, we haven't even established what position we're discussing. You're talking about some undefined role with undefined authority, and I think it's time to be clear, Pemberton interrupted. He looked directly at my father, his voice firm but not unkind. Richard, you're a good man and a valuable member of this team. But you're also about to learn something about your daughter that's going to challenge everything you think you know about leadership and potential. He turned back to me, and in his eyes I saw a decision that had already been made, probably weeks ago. Ms. Harris, he said formally. The board of directors has voted. Pending successful completion of a structured transition period, we'd like you to become the next chief executive officer of Whitmore Industries. The room exploded. 3 people started talking at once. Jennifer Caldwell was smiling broadly. Marcus Webb looked stunned but intrigued. And my father? My father looked like someone had just told him the earth was flat. This is a joke, he said, his voice shaking. Tell me this is some kind of exercise, Larry. A test. Pemberton's expression remained steady. It's not a test, Richard. The board met last Monday and voted 7-2 in favor. The decision is final. 7-2? My father's voice rose. Who voted against? That's confidential board business, Diana Rothschild said quietly. But the majority was decisive. My father pushed back from the table, standing again. She's 27 years old. She's never managed anything bigger than a 5-person consulting team. You're going to hand her a billion-dollar company with 15,000 employees based on what? A few successful projects and a good presentation? Based on 18 months of evaluation, Pemberton corrected. We didn't make this decision lightly, Richard. After the board members saw Stella's presentation in San Francisco, we commissioned a complete background check. We interviewed her clients, her colleagues, her professors from Northwestern. We brought in industrial psychologists to assess her leadership potential. We've been more thorough with this hire than any in company history. Paul Chen spoke up, his tone measured. I have to admit, Larry, I'm surprised too. Not because I doubt Ms. Harris's capabilities. Her analysis tonight was impressive, but because of the risk. Wall Street doesn't typically respond well to unconventional CEO appointments. Our stock price could take a hit. It might, Pemberton acknowledged. In the short term. But we're not managing quarterly earnings anymore, Paul. We're managing for survival. Every metric we track shows traditional manufacturers losing ground. We can keep doing what we've always done and slowly decline into irrelevance, or we can take a calculated risk on someone who actually understands how to compete in the modern economy. Tom Morrison was grinning. I think it's brilliant. We've been talking about innovation and transformation for years, but we keep promoting people who are invested in the old way of doing things. No offense to anyone here. Plenty taken, my father snapped. I finally found my voice, though it came out smaller than I intended. I haven't actually said yes. The room went quiet again, all eyes turning to me. Pemberton's expression softened slightly. You're right. I apologize for putting you on the spot like this, Ms. Harris. The offer is genuine, but you're under no obligation to accept. I imagine this comes as quite a shock. Shock didn't begin to cover it. 20 minutes ago, I'd been trying to figure out why I was invited to dinner. Now I was being offered the leadership of a company I'd never even visited. My hands were shaking under the table. I need time to think, I said. Of course, Pemberton replied. Take the weekend. We'll schedule a proper meeting next week to discuss details. Compensation, transition timeline, support structure. Jennifer has put together a comprehensive package for your review. Jennifer slid a leather portfolio across the table. I stared at it like it might bite. My father's laugh was bitter. Compensation, of course. What's the going rate for turning a company over to someone who doesn't know the difference between a CNC machine and a coffee maker? That's enough, Richard, Marcus Webb said, his voice hard. Whatever your personal feelings, show some professional respect. Professional respect? Marcus, she's my daughter. I've been with this company for 28 years and now I'm supposed to… what? Report to my own child? Take orders from someone I was teaching to ride a bike when you hired me? The hurt in his voice cut through my shock. This wasn't just about my qualifications or his ego. He felt betrayed. By Pemberton, by the board, maybe even by me. Dad, I started, but he held up a hand. Don't. Just don't. He looked at Pemberton. I need to be excused. Richard, sit down. We're not finished here. I think we are. My father grabbed his jacket from the back of his chair. You've made your decision. You don't need me here to celebrate it. He walked out, the door closing behind him with a definitive click. The silence that followed was excruciating. I felt like I should apologize or explain or chase after him, but I was frozen, unable to process any of it. Jennifer Caldwell broke the tension. Well, that could have gone better. Give him time, Pemberton said. Richard's a good man, but change has never been his strength. He'll come around. I wasn't so sure. The look on my father's face wasn't just anger, it was devastation. Diana Rothschild leaned forward. Stella, I want you to understand something. This isn't personal against your father or anyone else in this room. We're facing an existential threat to this company, and we need leadership that can navigate it. Your age isn't a liability, it's an asset. You don't have 40 years of institutional bias telling you what's impossible. But I also don't have 40 years of experience telling me what's necessary, I countered. My father wasn't entirely wrong. I don't know this company. I don't know about manufacturing at this scale. What if I make a decision that thanks everything? You will make mistakes, Pemberton said bluntly. Every CEO does. But we're not asking you to do this alone. You'll have this entire team supporting you. Marcus knows operations inside and out. Jennifer can teach you the financial side in her sleep. Tom understands our innovation pipeline. Diana handles legal and regulatory. And I'll be here as chairman, at least for the transition. Marcus nodded. For what it's worth, I was skeptical when Larry first mentioned your name 3 months ago. Then I read your case studies. The Bergen project especially. That modular manufacturing approach is exactly what we need in our automotive division. I've been trying to push something similar for 2 years, but I keep hitting resistance from people who say it won't work at our scale. Because you need executive authority to override that resistance, I said, understanding dawning. A VP can recommend, but a CEO can mandate. Exactly. Marcus smiled. You're already thinking like a leader. Paul Chen was still frowning. I'm concerned about the optics. How do we announce this without it looking like nepotism? Richard Harris's daughter becomes CEO while he's still VP of operations. The headlines write themselves. Which is why Richard won't be VP of operations, Pemberton said quietly. Another bomb dropped into the conversation. What do you mean? I asked. Part of our succession planning involves restructuring the executive team, Pemberton explained. Several of our VPs are at retirement age. Richard is 61. We're offering him a generous early retirement package, full pension, benefits, and a consulting role if he wants it. That was always the plan, regardless of who became CEO. Does he know that? I asked. He was supposed to be informed tonight after dinner. Obviously, events overtook that timeline. Pemberton sighed. This isn't how I wanted it to happen. I felt sick. My father thought I was taking his job, that I'd somehow engineered this to leapfrog over him. The truth was more complicated, but probably wouldn't feel much better to him. He was being pushed out to make room for a new generation. And I just happened to be part of that generation. Tom Morrison. Perhaps sensing my distress changed the subject. So what happens next? Assuming Stella accepts, what does the transition actually look like? Jennifer pulled out another document. We've mapped out a 12-month plan. The first 6 months, Stella shadows the current executive team, learns the business, and starts building relationships with key stakeholders, major clients, union leadership, board members. She'll have the title of CEO-elect and will attend all executive meetings but won't have final decision authority. And after 6 months? I asked. You transition to full CEO responsibilities, Pemberton said. I remain as chairman for another year to provide guidance. Then I step down completely. By the end of your 2nd year, it's entirely your company to lead. Marcus raised his wine glass. Assuming she survives the first 6 months. Richard isn't going to be the only one with doubts. We've got plant managers, department heads, and union reps who've been here longer than Stella's been alive. They're not going to trust her automatically. Then she'll have to earn it, Diana said. The same way every leader does, by listening, learning, and proving herself through results. I looked around the table at these executives who were suddenly willing to bet their careers on me. They didn't know me, not really. They knew my case studies and my credentials, but they didn't know how I handled pressure or crisis, or the 1,000 small decisions that define leadership. And yet, they were offering me something most people spend decades working toward. Jennifer must have seen something in my expression because she smiled gently. "You don't have to decide tonight, Stella. Take the weekend. Think it through. Talk to people you trust. This is a life-changing decision. But you should know," Pemberton added, "that if you turn it down, we'll have to restart our search. You're not one candidate among many, you're the candidate. The board won't move forward without you." The weight of that statement pressed down on me. 15,000 jobs. Hundreds of millions in revenue. Families depend on this company for their livelihoods, and they wanted to put it in my hands. I picked up the leather portfolio. "I'll review everything this weekend. Can I ask one question?" "Of course," Pemberton said. "Why did you tell me tonight in front of everyone instead of privately?" "You knew my father would react badly." Pemberton's expression grew thoughtful. "Because I wanted you to see what you'd be walking into. Not a fairy tale, not some easy path to the corner office. You'd be leading a team that includes people who doubt you, managing a company with deep cultural resistance to change, and yes, navigating complicated personal relationships. If you can't handle one difficult dinner, you can't handle this job." I met his eyes. "So this was a test." "Everything is a test," he replied. "The question is whether you pass." I left the Metropolitan Club at 10:30 with a leather portfolio that weighed almost nothing and felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. The valet brought my car around, and I sat in the driver's seat for 10 minutes before I could bring myself to turn the key. My phone had 6 missed calls from my mother and 3 text messages asking if I was okay. My father, apparently, had gone straight home and locked himself in his study without explanation. She was worried. I didn't know what to tell her, so I didn't call back. Not yet. Instead, I drove to the only place I knew I could think clearly, the lakefront path near Montrose Harbor. Even at this hour, there were a few joggers and dog walkers moving through the pools of streetlights. I parked and walked down to the water, the portfolio tucked under my arm. The Chicago skyline glittered across the dark water. Somewhere in those buildings, people were working late in offices, making decisions that affected thousands of lives. In boardrooms and conference centers, leaders were shaping the future of their industries. And somehow, inexplicably, I'd just been invited to join them. I sat on a bench and opened the portfolio. The compensation package was listed on the first page, and I actually gasped. Base salary of $850,000, with performance bonuses that could push it over $2 million in the first year. Stock options that would vest over 5 years. A relocation allowance if I wanted to move closer to Whitmore's headquarters in Schaumburg. Company car, full benefits, executive retirement plan. I was currently making $87,000 as a senior analyst. This was a different universe. But it wasn't the money that made my hands shake as I turned the pages. It was the responsibility outlined in the job description. Responsible for overall strategic direction, financial performance, and operational excellence across all divisions. 15,000 employees, 8 manufacturing facilities, $1.2 billion in annual revenue. My biggest project at Morrison & Fletcher had involved a company with 400 employees and $50 million in revenue. Whitmore was 25 times that size. The transition plan Jennifer mentioned was outlined in detail. Month 1, shadow Marcus Webb in operations. Visit all 8 facilities, meet with plant managers. Month 2, shadow Jennifer in finance. Review budgets and forecasting models. Month 3, Paul Chen and strategic planning. And so on. Through all 6 months before I'd assume any real authority, it was thoughtfully designed, comprehensive, and terrifying. My phone rang. My mother. "Stella, where are you? Your father won't talk to me, and you're not answering." "I'm fine, Mom. I'm at the lakefront. I just needed some air." "What happened at that dinner?" "Richard came home looking like someone died." He won't tell me anything except that it was about you. I took a breath. They offered me a job. A big one, at Whitmore? Honey, that's wonderful. Why would that upset your father? Because the job is CEO, Hollins. Then, I'm sorry, what? I explained it all. The case studies, the 18-month evaluation, Pemberton's announcement. With each detail, the situation sounded more absurd. My mother, usually quick with advice, seemed genuinely at a loss for words. And your father was just... When they told you? He tried to talk them out of it. Told them I wasn't qualified, wasn't ready, wasn't executive material. My mother made a small sound that might have been anger or pain. Oh, Richard, he's not wrong, Mom. I've never run anything. What if I fail? What if I make decisions that cost people their jobs? Stella Marie Harris, listen to me. My mother's voice turned firm. Your father is a good man, but he's spent his entire career being afraid of standing out. He does his job well, keeps his head down, and never takes risks. That's worked for him, and I'm proud of what he's built. But you're not him. You've never been afraid to try things that scare you? This is different. This isn't trying out for a play or applying to business school. This is someone seeing your potential and believing in you, she interrupted. Don't let your father's fear become yours. And don't let his anger make you doubt yourself. After we hung up, I sat with those words. My father's fear. Is that what his reaction really was? Not judgment of my abilities, but fear that I was taking a path he'd never had the courage to pursue? I stayed at the lakefront until midnight, then drove home. My apartment felt too small for the decision I was carrying. I spread the portfolio contents across my dining table and started reading every page, every clause, every detail. At 2 a.m, I called my best friend from Northwestern, Maya Chen, who now worked as a corporate attorney in New York. This better be an emergency, she answered groggily. I got offered a CEO position. What? Where? Stella, what are you talking about? I told her everything. By the end, she was fully awake and practically screaming. Are you insane? You have to take this. Do you know how rare this is? Women make up less than 10% of Fortune 1000 CEOs, and you're being handed this opportunity at 27. That's exactly the problem, Maya. I'm 27. What if they're making a mistake? What if I'm the next Elizabeth Holmes? Holmes committed fraud. You're being offered a legitimate position based on legitimate work. Completely different. But the pressure, it will be intense, Maya agreed. You'll work 100-hour weeks. You'll make decisions that affect thousands of lives. You'll probably lose sleep and gain stress and question yourself constantly. But Stella, you've never backed down from a challenge in your life. Why start now? After I hung up with Maya, I made coffee and watched the sunrise from my window. Saturday morning arrived without me having slept at all. At 9 a.m., my phone buzzed with a text from Tom Morrison, the VP of Innovation I'd sat next to at dinner. Hey, Stella. Know you're processing a lot. If you want to see Whitmore before deciding, I'm at the Naperville facility today. Unofficial tour if you're interested. No pressure, I stared at the message. He was offering me a lifeline, a chance to see the company without the formal weight of executives watching my every reaction. I texted back, what time? 2 hours later, I was pulling into a sprawling industrial complex west of the city. Tom met me at the security gate, dressed in jeans and a Whitmore polo shirt, a far cry from his dinner suit. Thought you might want to see what you'd actually be running, he said with a grin. Come on. The facility was enormous. Football fields of manufacturing floor space, with massive machines cutting, shaping, and assembling metal components I couldn't identify. The noise was overwhelming, a constant din of grinding, hammering, and mechanical precision. Tom handed me safety glasses and earplugs. We walked the floor, and he shouted explanations over the noise, pointing out different production lines, quality control stations, and shipping areas. What struck me most were the workers. They moved with practiced efficiency, operating complex machinery with the ease of long familiarity. These were craftsmen, people who'd spent careers mastering their trade. And I was supposed to lead them? We ended up in a break room where several workers were having lunch. Tom introduced me simply as Stella, a consultant looking at our operations. No mention of the CEO position. A man in his 50s, name tag reading Dale, nodded at me. Are you here to tell us how to cut costs? Because we've been through 4 of those consultants in 3 years, and we're already running lean. I'm not here to cut anything, I said honestly. I'm just trying to understand how things work. First consultant who's ever said that, Dale replied with a slight smile. Usually they show up with clipboards and ideas about efficiency who've never actually run a machine in their lives. How long have you worked here? I asked. 23 years. Started as an apprentice out of high school. Now I'm lead machinist on the automotive line. What's the biggest challenge you face every day? Dale glanced at Tom, as if checking whether it was safe to be honest. Tom just nodded. Design changes? Dale said. Engineering sends us specs, we set up the machines and start production. Then the client changes something, and we have to retool everything. Costs time and money, and it's frustrating as hell because half the time, if someone had asked us during the design phase, we could have told them that part wouldn't work. So there's a communication gap between design and production? Grand Canyon-sized gap, another worker chimed in. They don't ask us anything until something goes wrong. Then suddenly it's our fault for not anticipating problems we weren't consulted about. I looked at Tom. Is that a known issue? Very well known. Very persistent. Every VP who's tried to fix it runs into the same problem. Designers don't want floor workers second-guessing their engineering, and floor workers feel disrespected. It's a culture problem more than a process problem. This was exactly what I'd talked about at dinner. Information silos, hierarchical thinking, wasted expertise. Hearing it from Dale made it real in a way that case studies never did. We spent another hour at the facility. Tom showed me the innovation lab where they prototyped new products, the quality control center with its microscopic precision measurements, and the logistics hub coordinating shipments across the country. As we walked back to the parking lot, Tom said, "So, still think you can't do this? I think it's more complicated than I imagined." Everything is. But you asked Dale the right question. What's your biggest challenge? Most executives never ask that. They tell workers what the challenges are based on spreadsheets and reports. You actually listened. Listening isn't the same as leading. No, but it's the foundation. Tom leaned against his truck. Look, I'll be honest with you. When Larry first told us about you, I thought he'd lost his mind. Bringing in someone young with no manufacturing experience, it seemed like corporate suicide. But then I read your work. Really read it. And I realized you have something most of us don't. You see systems, not just pieces. You understand how changing one thing ripples through everything else. That's just basic analysis. It's really not. Most people optimize their own domain without considering downstream effects. You think holistically. That's rare. I drove home that afternoon with a different perspective. The facility wasn't an abstract billion-dollar entity. It was Dale and hundreds like him, people who'd dedicated their careers to mastering a craft. If I took this job, I'd be responsible for protecting their livelihoods while also transforming how they worked. It was overwhelming and humbling and somehow, despite everything, exciting. Sunday morning, I called my father. He didn't answer. I tried twice more, then gave up and drove to my parents' house. My mother opened the door, relief flooding her face. Thank God, he's been in his study since Friday. I can barely get him to eat. I found him at his desk, staring at papers without really seeing them. When I knocked on the doorframe, he looked up, and the pain in his eyes nearly broke me. Dad, we need to talk. If you're here to gloat, I'm here because you're my father. And I love you, and this situation is tearing us apart. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, they're forcing me out, Stella. 28 years of service, and they're putting me out to pasture for someone younger. For my own daughter. That's not what's happening, I said gently. They were already planning restructuring. This isn't about me. It feels like it's about you. I sat down across from him. I haven't accepted yet. I wanted to talk to you first. His eyes widened slightly. You're actually considering turning it down? I'm considering everything. I took a breath. Dad, why did you always tell me I wasn't executive material? The question seemed to catch him off guard. He rubbed his face, suddenly looking older than his 61 years. Because I didn't want you to get hurt, he said finally. I've watched talented people get chewed up by corporate politics. I've seen brilliant minds destroyed by the pressure. I wanted to protect you from that. Or maybe, I said softly, you wanted to protect yourself from watching me surpass you. The words hung between us, brutal in their honesty. My father's expression crumbled. Maybe, he whispered. Maybe I did. My father and I sat in silence for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The admission hung between us, raw and honest in a way we'd never been before. I was 23 when you were born, he finally said. Fresh out of college, working the factory floor at Whitmore, terrified I'd never be able to provide for you and your mother. Every promotion I fought for, every hour of overtime I worked, it was all to build something stable. A foundation. I know, Dad. And then you came along, brilliant and fearless, and I watched you do in 3 years what took me 15. You made it look easy. And I think part of me resented that. The vulnerability in his voice made my throat tight. This was a side of my father I'd never seen. Uncertain, afraid, human. It wasn't easy, I said. You just never saw me struggle because I didn't want to disappoint you. Every project I led, I was terrified I'd fail. Every presentation, I practiced until 2 a.m. You set the bar so high that I've spent my entire career trying to prove I was worthy of being your daughter. He looked up sharply. Stella, I never wanted you to feel— I know you didn't. But that's what happens when you tell someone they're not good enough. They either give up or they spend their lives trying to prove you wrong? I managed a small smile. I chose option 2. My father stood and walked to the window, hands in his pockets. Are you going to take the job? I don't know yet. But I need to know that if I do, you'll be okay. I can't build a career on the ruins of our relationship. He turned back to face me. If you take it, will you listen to advice from an old manufacturing veteran who knows where all the bodies are buried? If you'll accept guidance from a young consultant who sees possibilities you might have missed. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite acceptance, but maybe the beginning of it. Pemberton's right about one thing. The company needs to change. I've been fighting it because change is scary, and I'm too close to retirement to want to learn new tricks. But you? He shook his head. You could actually pull this off. You think so? I've read your case studies, Stella. After Friday night, I went online and found everything you've published. The Bergen project was exceptional. The Hartwell turnaround was borderline miraculous. You have instincts I never developed. He paused. But you need to understand something. Being right about strategy isn't enough. You need people to follow you, even when they don't agree, especially when they don't agree. How do I do that? Respect, not the kind you demand, the kind you earn. Listen more than you talk. Admit when you're wrong, and never ever forget that every decision you make affects real people with families and mortgages and dreams. He met my eyes. If you remember that, you'll be better than most CEOs I've met. I stood and hugged him. Really hugged him, not the perfunctory embrace we usually shared. He held on tight, and I felt the tension that had defined our relationship for years finally begin to ease. I'm sorry, he whispered, for every time I made you feel like you weren't enough. You've always been more than enough. Monday morning, I called Jennifer Caldwell's office and scheduled a meeting for that afternoon. The Whitmore headquarters building was sleek glass and steel, nothing like the industrial facility I'd visited with Tom. Jennifer's office was on the top floor with a view that stretched across the Chicago suburbs. Stella, she greeted me warmly. I wasn't sure we'd hear from you. I had a lot to think about, and I set my purse down and took a breath. I want to accept, but I need to be clear about something first. I'm not walking in here pretending I know everything. I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to need help, and I need everyone to be honest with me, even when the truth is uncomfortable. Jennifer's smile widened. That's exactly what we hoped you'd say. The last thing we need is someone who thinks they have all the answers. She pulled out a document. Let's talk specifics. We spent 3 hours going through the contract, the transition plan, and the expectations. Jennifer explained the political landscape, which board members were allies, which would need convincing, which external stakeholders mattered most. The union is going to be your biggest challenge initially, she said. They've been burned by management promising change and delivering layoffs. You'll need to meet with their leadership early and often. What about the executive team? Anyone I should worry about? Jennifer hesitated. Paul Chen is brilliant but territorial. He views strategy as his domain, and he won't appreciate a new CEO with ideas that contradict his plans. Marcus is genuinely supportive, but he'll test you. Not maliciously, just to make sure you can handle pressure. Diana plays her cards close, but once you earn her trust, she's invaluable. And my father? Richard's situation is delicate. Legally, he's being offered retirement, not termination. But emotionally? Jennifer shrugged. That's between you two. Professionally, I'd recommend keeping some distance for the first few months. Let him transition out gracefully without the complication of reporting to his daughter. It was practical advice, even if it stung a little. By Wednesday, the paperwork was finalized. I gave Morrison and Fletcher my notice. 2 weeks that would be the strangest of my career as I prepared to leave consulting for the corner office. My colleagues' reactions ranged from shock to congratulations to barely concealed envy. My director, Robert Klein, called me into his office. CEO of Whitmore Industries, he said, shaking his head. I knew you were talented, Stella, but this is unprecedented. I'm terrified, I admitted. Good. Confidence without fear is arrogance. You'll do great things, he paused. For what it's worth, I tried to convince them to hire you as a consultant instead. Would have been a huge account for us. But Pemberton insisted you needed to be internal to make real change. He's probably right. He usually is. That's why he's scary. The official announcement came the following Monday. A carefully worded press release that emphasized my track record while acknowledging my age and unconventional background. The business media exploded. Bloomberg. Manufacturing giant takes risky. Bet on 27-year-old CEO Wall Street Journal. Whitmore Industries appoints youngest Fortune 1000 CEO. Forbes. Can millennial leadership save legacy manufacturing? The stock price dipped 3% in the first hour of trading. Not catastrophic, but enough to make my stomach churn. I was already costing the company money, and I hadn't even started yet. My first official day was scheduled for the following Monday, the beginning of my 6-month shadow period. I'd spend the first week with Marcus Webb in operations, learning the guts of the business. The night before, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed running through scenarios, mentally preparing for every possible disaster. What if the workers hated me? What if I made a decision that bankrupted a division? What if I proved every skeptic right? My phone buzzed at 2 a.m., a text from my father. First day jitters are normal. I had them 28 years ago. You'll be fine. Proud of you. 3 words I'd waited my whole life to hear. Proud of you. I arrived at Whitmore headquarters at 6:30 Monday morning, 90 minutes before I was supposed to meet Marcus. The building was mostly empty, just security and a few early birds. I rode the elevator to the executive floor and found the office that would eventually be mine, currently empty except for a desk and chair. Standing in that space, looking out at the sunrise over the industrial parks and highways, I felt the full weight of what I'd agreed to. 15,000 people would be affected by the decisions made in this room. Families, communities, suppliers, customers, an entire ecosystem depending on getting this right. Starting early, I see. I turned to find Lawrence Pemberton in the doorway, holding 2 cups of coffee. He handed me one. Couldn't sleep, I admitted. Neither could I on my first day as chairman, 15 years ago, but I remember it like yesterday. He stood beside me, looking out the window. Want to know the secret to leading a company this size? Please. You can't do it alone. The moment you think you have to have all the answers, you've already failed. Your job isn't to know everything, it's to build a team that collectively knows everything. and create an environment where they're willing to share it. That sounds easier than it is. Much easier. He smiled. You're going to face opposition, Stella. Some of it legitimate, some of it political, some of it just resistance to change. People will question your decisions, your age, your experience. Some will hope you fail just so they can say they were right about you. That's a terrifying pep talk. I'm not finished. Despite all that, you're going to succeed. Not because you're perfect, but because you have something most leaders lack. You genuinely care about getting it right. You're not here for ego or power or to pad your resume. You're here because you believe you can make a difference. That authenticity will carry you through the hard moments. He set down his coffee cup. Marcus is waiting downstairs. Time to start learning. Welcome to Whitmore Industries, Ms. Harris. As I followed him out of the office, my phone buzzed with messages. Maya wishing me luck, my mother sending heart emojis, colleagues from Morrison and Fletcher offering encouragement. And one more text. This one from Tom Morrison. Day 1 of changing everything. Let's make it count. I walked into the operations center where Marcus Webb was waiting with a hard hat and safety vest. Behind him stood a group of plant managers, some looking curious, others skeptical. Team, Marcus said. Meet Stella Harris, our new CEO-elect. She's going to spend this week learning what you do, so don't go easy on her. If she can't handle the floor, she can't handle the corner office. One of the managers, a woman with steel gray hair and sharp eyes, stepped forward. Stella Harris. You're the consultant who fixed Bergen Industrial? I am. Read about that turnaround. Impressive work. She extended her hand. I'm Carol Patterson, Naperville Facility Manager. Are you ready to get your hands dirty? I shook her hand firmly. That's exactly why I'm here. Good answer. Carol smiled slightly. Let's see if you can back it up. We've got a production problem on line 7 that's been driving us crazy for 3 weeks. You've got today to figure it out. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Carol, she's here to observe, not solve. Then she's not learning anything useful, Carol interrupted. Real leadership isn't watching from a distance. It's getting in the trenches. So, what do you say, future CEO? You want to observe or you want to lead? Every eye in the room was on me. This was it, the first test of many to come. I took off my jacket and reached for the hard hat. Show me line 7. Carol's smile widened. Now we're talking. As we headed to the factory floor, Marcus fell into step beside me. Welcome to Whitmore, Stella. Hope you're ready? I wasn't. Not even close. But I was here, and that was a start. Line 7 was a disaster. Components were backing up on the conveyor belt, machines were stopping mid-cycle, and the entire production schedule was 3 days behind. Carol Patterson walked me through the chaos with the clinical precision of a surgeon describing a failing patient. Started 2 weeks ago, she explained over the mechanical noise. No obvious cause. We've checked the machines, recalibrated everything, and brought in technicians. The equipment is fine, but something's breaking down in the workflow. I watched the line for 20 minutes, tracing the movement of parts from station to station. The workers operated with practiced efficiency, but there was something off about the rhythm. Small hesitations, awkward handoffs, moments of confusion. Can I talk to the line workers? I asked. Carol shrugged. Be my guest. I approached a woman operating a welding station, removing my hard hat so she could see my face clearly. Hi, I'm Stella. Mind if I ask you about the workflow? She looked suspicious. You from corporate? Sort of. I'm trying to understand why the line keeps jamming. Do you want the truth or the official answer? Always the truth. She set down her welding gun. The truth is, they moved Jamie to the stamping station 2 weeks ago when Derek retired. Jamie's good, but he's left-handed. The station setup is designed for right-handed operators. So he's slower and everything downstream backs up. We told the supervisor, but he said we need to adapt and overcome. I looked at the stamping station. Sure enough, the worker, Jamie, was contorting himself awkwardly to reach controls positioned for right-handed operation. How long would it take to reconfigure that station? I asked Carol. 4 hours, maybe 5. But we'd have to shut down the line. And if we don't fix it, we stay 3 days behind schedule, possibly fall further back. I did the mental math. 5 hours of downtime versus weeks of reduced efficiency. Shut it down. Reconfigure the station for left-handed operation. Carol's eyebrows rose. You're making that call? On your first day? That's why I'm here, isn't it? To make decisions. She studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. All right. Let's see if you're right. By noon, the maintenance crew had reconfigured the station. By 2 p.m., Line 7 was running smoothly for the first time in weeks. By the end of shift, we'd made up for 8 hours of lost production. The welder who'd told me about Jamie approached as I was leaving. Hey, thanks for actually listening. Most corporate types just tell us to work harder. Working harder doesn't fix bad system design, I replied. But you knew that. Someone should have listened sooner. Word spread fast. By my third day, workers at other facilities knew about the Line 7 fix. When I visited the Milwaukee plant, the floor supervisor greeted me with, "Heard you're the exec who actually talks to workers. Got 15 minutes? I've got some ideas about our inventory system." I gave him 30 minutes. His ideas were brilliant. The 6-month transition period became the most intensive education of my life. I spent 12-hour days shadowing executives, attending meetings, learning systems I'd never encountered. Marcus taught me about production capacity and supply chain logistics. Jennifer walked me through financial modeling until I could read a balance sheet in my sleep. Paul Chen grudgingly shared his strategic planning frameworks, testing me with increasingly complex scenarios. But the real education happened on factory floors, in break rooms, during shift changes. I learned that Danny and Schaumburg had a photographic memory for machine specifications, that Maria in Rockford could predict maintenance issues by listening to engine sounds, that the third shift crew in Naperville had invented a quality control process that was more effective than the company's official one. These weren't just workers, they were experts, whose knowledge had been systematically ignored by management, that valued credentials over competence. I started a simple practice. Every week, I ate lunch in a different facility cafeteria. No announcement, no fanfare. Just sitting down with workers and asking questions. What frustrates you? What would you change? What ideas have you shared that nobody listened to? The ideas poured in. Some were impractical. Many were expensive. But several were game changers that cost almost nothing to implement. Month 4, I presented my first major initiative to the board, the Collaborative Innovation Program. Every facility would form cross-functional teams, mixing floor workers, engineers, managers, to identify and solve operational problems. Teams that generated measurable improvements would share in the cost savings. Paul Chen was skeptical. You're essentially letting factory workers make strategic decisions. I'm letting experts solve problems in their domain, I corrected. We're paying industrial psychologists 6 figures for insights that Danny from Schaumburg could provide over lunch. The board approved it, 3 months ahead of my official CEO start date. The first pilot results came back 6 weeks later. Production efficiency up 9%. Workplace safety incidents down 14%. Employee satisfaction up 22%. And the stock price, which had dipped when I was announced, climbed back to its previous level and kept rising. My father and I developed a new rhythm. Once a week, we'd meet for breakfast at a diner halfway between his house and my apartment. He'd bring his decades of institutional knowledge. I'd bring fresh perspectives. We argued, collaborated, and slowly rebuilt our relationship on professional respect rather than parental authority. "You're doing something I never had the courage to try," he told me one morning. "You're challenging the system instead of just surviving within it." "I learned that from watching you," I replied. "You showed me what dedication looks like." "I'm just applying it differently," he smiled, genuinely smiled. "Your mother keeps telling me I should be prouder. She's right." Month 6 arrived faster than I expected. The shadow period was ending, and the board scheduled the formal transition for the annual shareholder meeting. I'd present the company's strategic direction and officially assume the CEO role in front of 3,000 attendees. The night before the meeting, Pemberton invited me to his office. "Nervous?" he asked. "Terrified?" "Good. Stay that way." The moment you stop being nervous is the moment you stop taking this seriously. He handed me a leather folder, different from the one he'd given me at dinner. This is every mistake I made in my first year as chairman. Read it tonight. Learn from my failures so you can make new ones instead of repeating mine. I opened it to find a handwritten journal, page after page of honest reflections on decisions gone wrong, opportunities missed, relationships damaged. Why are you showing me this? Because leadership isn't about being perfect. It's about being honest when you're not. You're going to fail, Stella. Probably spectacularly, definitely publicly. The question is whether you'll learn from it or let it break you. He stood. I'm betting you'll learn. Don't prove me wrong. The shareholder meeting was held at the Chicago Convention Center. 3,000 people filled the auditorium. Investors, employees, analysts, media. I stood backstage in a navy suit, breathing deeply, mentally reviewing my presentation. Tom Morrison found me in the wings. You've got this. Just remember, you've already proven yourself to the people who matter. This is just making it official. Marcus Webb was there too, surprisingly. Carol Patterson sent me to tell you that Line 7 is running at 112% efficiency. They want you to know. Jennifer Caldwell handed me a small gift box. Inside was a silver pen engraved with CEO, Whitmore Industries. For signing your first official documents, she said. Make them count. And then my father appeared, wearing his best suit. Stella, Dad, what are you doing here? I'm retiring next month, but I'm still VP of Operations until then. Which means I get to introduce you, he smiled. Pemberton thought it would be appropriate. I thought it would be terrifying. But your mother insisted. You don't have to. I want to. He straightened my collar, a gesture from my childhood. Let me do this right. The lights dimmed. Pemberton delivered opening remarks, then gestured to my father. Richard Harris walked to the podium, and the room quieted. I've worked at Whitmore Industries for 28 years, he began. I've seen this company through recessions, technological shifts, and massive market changes. I've worked with 5 different CEOs, each bringing their own vision and approach. He paused, scanning the crowd. Today, I have the extraordinary privilege of introducing our next CEO. I'm going to be honest. When the board first told me who they'd chosen, I was skeptical. I thought they were making a mistake. I questioned her experience, her readiness, her ability to lead a company this size. My heart pounded. Where was he going with this? I was wrong, he continued, his voice strong. Over the past 6 months, I've watched Stella Harris do something I've never seen in my nearly 3 decades here. She's made our workers feel heard. She's transformed how we think about innovation. She's proven that real leadership isn't about having all the answers, but about asking the right questions and listening to the people who actually do the work. He looked directly at me in the wings. I'm proud to introduce someone who's already made this company better, and who will continue to challenge us, inspire us, and lead us into the future. Ladies and gentlemen, your new Chief Executive Officer, my daughter, Stella Harris. The applause was thunderous. I walked onto that stage, shook my father's hand, and stood behind the podium. 3,000 faces looked back at me, some supportive, some curious, some still skeptical. Thank you, I said, my voice steady. And thank you, Dad, for that introduction, and for teaching me that being wrong and admitting it is the first step toward being right. Laughter rippled through the audience. I'm 27 years old, which makes me the youngest CEO in Whitmore's history, possibly in the industry. I haven't earned this position through decades of service. I've earned it by proving that new perspectives, combined with respect for institutional knowledge, can solve problems that we've accepted as unsolvable. I outlined the strategic direction, modernizing operations, empowering workforce innovation, expanding into emerging markets, investing in sustainable manufacturing. Each initiative backed by data from the past 6 months, each one showing measurable results. But here's what matters most, I concluded. This isn't my vision alone. It's built on the expertise of 15,000 people who come to work every day and make this company run. My job isn't to have all the answers. It's to create an environment where the people with answers feel empowered to share them. That's how we'll succeed. That's how we'll grow. And that's how we'll prove that the best leaders aren't the ones who've been doing it longest. They're the ones willing to listen hardest. The applause was even louder this time. As I walked off stage, Pemberton was waiting with an extended hand. "Welcome to the corner office, Ms. Harris. Try not to burn it down." "No promises," I replied with a grin. 6 months later, Whitmore Industries reported its highest quarterly earnings in company history. The Collaborative Innovation Program had generated $23 million in cost savings. Employee turnover had dropped to a 10-year low. And 3 competitors had called asking how we'd managed to attract top talent away from Silicon Valley to work in manufacturing. My father officially retired, but stayed on as a consultant, mostly to advise me on navigating political waters and avoiding pitfalls he'd learned the hard way. We had lunch every Wednesday, a tradition neither of us wanted to break. One Wednesday, he slid a newspaper across the table. Forbes had just published their Most Influential CEOs Under 30 list. I was number 7. "Not bad for someone who wasn't executive material," I said. He laughed. A real, genuine laugh without any bitterness. "I'm never going to live that down, am I?" "Not a chance." "Good," he said. "Keep proving me wrong. It's good for my humility." I looked at my father, this man who doubted me, underestimated me, and ultimately helped me become the leader I needed to be. Our relationship wasn't perfect. We still argued. He still sometimes treated me like his little girl rather than a CEO. But he'd given me the greatest gift a parent can give, the space to surpass him, and the grace to be proud rather than threatened when I did. "Thanks, Dad," I said softly. "For what?" "For laughing when I wasn't executive material. I needed someone to prove wrong." He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You didn't prove me wrong, Stella. You proved yourself right. That's much more important." Outside, the Chicago skyline stretched toward an autumn sunset. Somewhere in 8 different facilities, my name was on production schedules and innovation reports. In boardrooms and on factory floors, people were implementing ideas that started with conversations over cafeteria lunches. I walked into that dinner 6 months ago as a consultant with a good track record. I walked out as someone being handed the impossible, and somewhere along the way, the impossible became inevitable. Because leadership isn't about being the most experienced person in the room. It's about being the person willing to learn from everyone in it. My father had taught me that, even if it took him a while to realize it himself. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.